A unique perspective on the pandemic is in this next interview with Plymouth County Treasurer Tom O'Brien, who not only shared how this pandemic has affected him personally, but provided valuable information about funds appropriated to help our community.
We got reports early on in January about what was happening in China. Obviously, in my role as an elected official, I follow the media, I follow the news, and we get a lot of reports on a fairly regular basis about things that might impact folks here in Plymouth County. The first time it became real was when we heard about it transferring over to Europe. And there were a lot of reports at the end of January, early February, that this was not something that was going to be contained on mainland China. It was something that was clearly going to impact the rest of the world. And the question was twofold. One, how big an impact was it going to be? And two, what could we do about it? And so when it hit over in Italy and Spain, those of us that were getting some of these reports really became concerned about what the United States reaction would be. But we knew it was pretty serious, at least from what we were seeing happening around the world, probably, right at the beginning of the February timeframe. The pandemic has impacted all of us in so many different ways. Professionally, it's impacted me in two real ways. One, how we operate on a day-to-day basis. We've had to really change our functions at work. As one of the administrators of the county, as one of those responsible for making some of these decisions, we were going to shut the office down for a period of time. That's not an easy decision to make as a government official because people need access to the services you're providing. And then we had to decide how we could bring people back to the office. And so we had to begin to space that out. One of the decisions I made very early on is that I would be the first one to come back, that I felt I could serve the role and the function of being in the office and let other people take more time and be at home. Most of the functions we have at Plymouth County can't be done remotely, so I was trying to do as many of them as I could. We have a fairly big office space, and we worked it out and made arrangements so that only 2 people would be in the office on any given day. Not only did we have 6 feet, we had hundreds of feet of separation for people. And then we had to come up with a schedule where people would rotate and begin to work half days. So as Governor Baker issued different phases of reopening, we were able to accommodate that and bring people back to the office. The other question we had from a function standpoint was, when do we allow the public back into the office? We had a box outside where people could leave documents and things that they needed to deliver, but the office remained closed to the general public, so only our staff was invited in. We then transferred to allowing the public in wearing a mask, which is where we are today. The biggest impact was that at the end of March, the federal government passed something that we all know as the CARES Act. And the CARES Act was trillions of dollars that was sent out to different levels of government to make sure that they could begin to deal with this pandemic. So one of the interesting components of the CARES Act is that there was money available to governmental entities to cover some of these costs that were incurred during the pandemic. Think about PPE that they had to buy, personal protection equipment, some of the plastic dividers that they had to put in, face masks, those types of things needed to be purchased right away. Also, a lot of technology had to be purchased so people could work remotely. All of those costs weren't in the budget and needed to be covered. So the CARES Act allowed for that to happen. What was an interesting component of the CARES Act is they allowed governmental entities with a population of 500,000 or more to become what they call a direct recipient or a primary recipient of these funds. Plymouth County, a lot of people don't know this, has 512,000 people. So we just made the mark and were eligible for a portion of the money that was sent to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So under the CARES Act, which was passed on March 27th, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was eligible for $2.7 billion. And so after much discussion with the county commissioners, after a lot of conversation with the state, with the governor's office and with A&F, we decided that it was best for our 27 communities here in Plymouth County for the county to apply for these monies for 2 reasons. One, we felt we could administer it better, and 2, we were local and that we could address the needs that each of our individual community had because we live in these communities. We know these individuals. We work with our town managers and our boards of selectmen and our city councilors. So we thought we were a better recipient of these monies. So on April 14th, we applied for the $90 million through the U.S. Treasury. And on April 27th, we received that money into a bank account contained and administered and managed by my office. So as the Plymouth County Treasurer, I'm the Chief Financial Officer of the county. And so now all of a sudden I had responsibility for $90 million of federal monies that come with a lot of rules and regulations and guidelines that you need to follow. So my job, even though it was fairly large to begin with, grew exponentially because we had to begin to administer this program. The more intelligent things we did right away was create a dedicated website so that people could follow how we were administering this website. So as much for posterity as anything else, that website is PlymouthCountyCares.com. And we certainly encourage anyone to go and look at that, and they can see of the 27 communities how much money has been disseminated already, where people are in the queue, the program that we have, and how much money each of our individual 27 communities is eligible for. But I can tell you that the administration of these resources takes an inordinate amount of time and effort and coordination. We have a great team. I clearly cannot do this by myself, but I am the program administrator. I am the chief financial officer. So all of those burdens ultimately rest on my shoulders. And so that has increased that responsibility and the workload significantly. So ironically, during this pandemic, I'm spending easily 60 to 70 to 80 hours a week working on not just the administration of this program, but the other parts of my job. Lastly, there's been a big impact because I am also the treasurer for our joint purchase group, which is a health group that provides health insurance for municipal employees, the Mayflower Municipal Health Group. That group does $80 million of business in a year, providing health insurance for the subscribers of our member units. And so with this pandemic, we weren't sure how that was going to impact health insurance. And obviously some people have had to go to the hospital to deal with COVID itself and to have tests, and regrettably some of them have found themselves in the hospital for an extended stay. And we think there are going to be some serious health issues that result from the fact that people haven't been able to have their routine checkups or follow up on routine surgeries that they need to do, or have their cancer screenings, or have their annual physicals. And so we expect that that will have an impact on the cost. And we're right now deciding, how do we deal with that? Do we keep money set aside to be able to cover that? Should that create a surge that we expect whenever the pandemic lessens or a vaccine is created or discovered? So those are some of the challenges that we deal with on a pretty regular basis. And so it's been a lot to deal with and a lot to address, but we have a great team in Plymouth County, and with the work of a lot of people and a lot of effort and the support of the Plymouth County Commissioners, I think we've been able to manage our way through it. I have two personal stories that I think are important to share because they're indicative of, I think, two sides of the pandemic. I have a very, very dear friend of mine, I've known him for a long time, who had traveled out of the state and was at a function. This was in early March, right before we really knew how much of an impact this could have. And regrettably, most of the people at the function contracted the disease. It took a number of days for him to get to the hospital, and unfortunately by the time he got to the hospital, he wasn't breathing. It was clear that he had the virus, and he had to end up being on a ventilator for more than 20 days. And it was very much touch and go. I'm very close to his family, and fortunately, my friend was one of the lucky ones. The second story is an interesting one. It involves my wife, who I adore. I actually call her my Wonder Woman, and she kind of proved this through this whole scenario. She has a disease that causes her to be immunosuppressed, and the disease had rekindled itself in the August and September timeframe the year before the pandemic, and she needed some major surgery. We finally got to the point where she could have some surgery in December, but the recovery was a lot more difficult than I think anybody had imagined. Her weight continued to go down. She wasn't able to eat, and one of the challenges was that she'd used up all her time at work. The day after the pandemic hit, they had to shut down her place of business and have everybody work from home. So from March 15th until the end of June, my wife did not leave the house, was able to work remotely, but as a result of that, was able to relieve some of the stress, be in an environment where I could care for her on a regular basis, but she, more importantly, could care for herself. Now, ironically, she's one of these people, and I wish I were. She still worked very hard from home, but she's not facing a 2-hour commute into Boston. She doesn't have the stress of dealing with the interaction of people, and she was very concerned, rightfully so, about how the disease might impact her, and certainly did not want to be in a position of contracting COVID. But what's been fascinating to me are the people that don't realize how serious this is, that to this day don't recognize that this is a very serious virus that is in fact killing people of all ages. And I think once we take that very fact seriously, we're better able to deal with it. And it was frustrating to hear people make the case that, well, this was just a more serious strain of the flu. It's not something that we should worry about or be concerned about. No, that is absolutely false. Scientific information is available to us about how serious this is, and we need to continue to take this seriously. I have to focus in on my job and getting that done, and so a lot has been put on hold. And the real question becomes, what are we going to do when we have a vaccine? Because I don't think until a vaccine is available, we'll be able to experience some of the things that we did pre-COVID. I hope this has given us maybe some more empathy to what people are going through. So many people have lost their jobs. So many people are struggling. And I think we need to continue to find a way to help them in any way possible. I do hope that a sense of compassion is something that we're thinking about more, and an empathy to even people in our own circle. And hopefully that's something that we can carry with us. The resiliency of the human spirit really gives me hope. We always find ways to deal with what is thrown at us. And so even when that has such a real impact as this pandemic has on each of our lives, we're finding ways to cope, and we're finding ways to deal with it. It's remarkable the time we live in, how quickly science can address and deal with some of the things that challenge us. So I have every confidence that we will have a vaccine. I don't know how long it's going to take, but it's remarkable to me how the resources have come together. This, in the long run, will strengthen us as a country. It will remind us that the ability to be involved in our government is probably one of the best things we have as Americans. And so what I hope it does also is encourage participation in our government, whether it's a fascination now with science and some of our young people that want to get involved in a scientific career because they want to solve the next challenge that comes. I've had the chance to be on a lot of Zoom meetings now. I was just on one not that long ago with a caucus of young people and talking about ideas, and I was there as a government official, and I was impressed with their inquisitiveness and their enthusiasm. It really gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Thank you, Tom, for sharing your story and information that affects all of us in Plymouth County. To learn more, visit PlymouthCountyCares.com.